Welcome to the Coming Home Well podcast, the show that educates, supports, and advocates for the veteran community. Your host, Dr. Tyler Piron, U.S. Army retired, will bring you exciting conversations with amazing guests about resources, research, and military history, all geared to helping our warriors to come home well. Here's your host, Dr. Tyler Piron.
Welcome back to Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Tyler Piron, and today we are doing something that's kind of neat. We have Tim Tetz, who is the Director of Outreach at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, and they have something that's really cool. I didn't know that they did this. I guess it's because DC is just up the street from me. If I want to go see the Vietnam Wall, I walk by it probably once every couple weeks or something, and I didn't even realize that they have like a life-size, almost life-size. I don't know. I'll have to ask. But it's a big wall that's a replica of the Vietnam Wall so that people that aren't able to get to D.C. can see it. But they have a bunch of other things as well. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well.
Well, thank you very much for having us today, Tyler.
So what is the Wall that Heals?
So in 1982, 40 years ago, this last weekend, we dedicated the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And we realized after dedicating that and adding the 3 servicemen in 1985 and the flagpole, that as we looked around in the country, there were people who couldn't necessarily make it to the wall in Washington, D.C. One of those organizations who was at the original dedication 40 years ago said, you know, this is a wonderful thing, but who the heck wants to ever come to Washington, D.C.? And I live outside
Facts.
here. Totally understand it. Why would you want to come to Washington, D.C. if you could avoid it, especially back in the early 80s? It was not a great place to visit. So they put a traveling memorial out on the road. They called it the Moving Wall. And they were out on the road in 1986. And in 1996, we kind of looked at surveyed the landscape and realized that there were a couple of traveling memorials that were out and about, but none of them were taking part in the educational and the reflective and healing nature of the wall. Our founder, Jan Scruggs, had called it the Wall that Heals, recognizing that was his underlying goal with the masters in PTSD, that this memorial that we were going to build on the National Mall would help heal a nation. That was their thought process. 1996, looking around, there wasn't necessarily a memorial that was going to be able to get out to bring it to the people. So we went out for the first time in November of 1996, and now we've been to over 700 communities nationwide with a replica of the memorial. Up until 2017, that replica was half scale, so you could walk amongst it. It was 250 feet long, and you still looked up over it. You still could stand over it at 5 feet tall. Most tall people could see over the top of it. It didn't give you that imposing nature of the wall, like you said. So in 2017, we created a new memorial. We revitalized the whole thing, and we basically have been out on the road now with a 3/4 scale replica. It took us 3 years to come up with the data to go on that replica. People laugh all the time, and they sit there and say, you know, you guys don't know where every name was on it. And we really, truly didn't. After we built the memorial, we kind of walked away from it, and we knew what panel and what line every name was on, but we didn't necessarily know what order they were in. So countless hours by volunteers and teammates, we put together that comprehensive list, and then we recreated this memorial. It's now 3/4 scale. So unless you're one of I don't even think there's an NBA player who's over 7.5 feet tall. You're literally dwarfed by this. You can feel what Mylan's vision was, that you were going to be buried. You're going to feel one with death. And we made it out of synthetic granite now, so it really kind of gives that reflective nature of it. So that memorial is something that we put out on the road for 29 weeks this last year. We were out in communities nationwide, and we'll do that every year, making sure that we can bring that healing and education nature into a community a week at a time throughout the year.
So how does somebody decide to invite you, or how does that process work for where you're going to take the wall?
So on average, we get about 100 applicants each year. We open that up Memorial Day, and it stays open. We just actually closed the application period down here just in the last couple of days here at the beginning of November. And so we keep that application period open, and we take applications from around the nation. We used to be really good in certain parts of the country. We'd always get there. I mean, You laugh that, here, there in Charlotte, that you don't even think of a traveling replica because it's so close. And that's true. But, we've come as close as Waynesboro. We displayed it in Waynesboro, the eastern side of West Virginia, because as shocking as that is, it's only 3-4 hours away from Washington, D.C. The kids don't necessarily get to come to the wall to see that. And so communities will work together, organizations within communities, clubs and everything else. They'll work together to bring it into their community. They'll go and put in an application, show that they've put on an event that it takes 5 days. It's open 24 hours a day. It takes near 200 volunteers to put this on. So they're going to demonstrate to us that we know how to do this. We can do this. We've got the group that's going to be able to push this forward. And they come to us with that application. We review through all those 101 applications for 2023. And then we try to select what we think are going to be the best applications of those. Who is going to do the best job in replicating this experience that you get when you come to Washington, D.C., and select those. And then we hold their hand as they prepare for, a year for that to come to their community.
Sounds like there's a whole lot of logistics that has to happen. You think, oh, they just go and show up and set up. And it sounds like there's a whole lot more that's involved.
There is a tremendous amount. I mean, obviously, beyond just that 200 people, you're going to try to get the word out in your community that this is coming. The worst thing to do is to bring it into town and then not have any visitors. And it happens. But generally, if they do their work within the community, they're going to make sure everybody in the community knows. They've got to fundraise. In the coming year, the cost to host the Wall That Heals is going to be $11,000. That helps subsidize the costs we have in bringing into it. But on top of that, there's costs for things like porta-johns and costs for printing and materials and maybe security or parade permits or the use of a park. All those things go into that overall cost. So they've got to do that fundraising. But then beyond that, you've got to go out and recruit and bring all those volunteers in. Maybe you want to put a t-shirt on their backs or something. But the important thing is, how do you bring those people in for the tours that they desire? I don't know about when the first time you came to the wall in Washington, D.C., Tyler, but the first time I came, I was in high school. I came with my parents, and it was one of probably 6 or 8 things we did that day. We had all of 10 minutes or something to do at the wall. We take great pride in the fact that what separates the Wall That Heals from the other traveling memorials that are out there is that our staff is trained to teach about the wall and the war at a grade level. So if you bring down 3rd graders, we're going to talk to the 3rd graders about what was this war about? What is patriotism? What is, service in military uniform? If you bring down a high schooler, we're going to talk about something totally different. We're going to maybe bring up domino theory, or we're going to bring up, why were we in the Cold War to begin with? Those pieces. And then on top of that, we offer out tours to guests where we'll do what we call an enhanced tour, and we'll give you an entire tour of the exhibit, because it's more than just the wall. When you come to Washington, D.C., you have the wall, and you have the 3 servicemen, you have the in memory plaque, flagpole, and of course the Women's Memorial. When you come to the Wall That Heals, one of the great things that you have is you have the Mobile Education Center, because that 51-foot trailer that the wall is carried in, that all those panels, this 375-foot monstrosity is carried in.
I can just see the setup. I'm picturing this.
Yeah.
7.5 feet tall. Yeah. Even with synthetic granite, it's very heavy.
People don't realize it takes a football field. I mean, they're like, oh, we're going to put it in a local town park. No, it doesn't fit there. But that 51-foot trailer that is 50,000 pounds of material that's weighed in it, that 51-foot trailer actually opens up into a museum. So you never get to see the 400,000 items that have been left behind at the wall in Washington, D.C. You never get to see, the baby sweater that the mom, hand knitted for her son that she left at the wall with a note that talked about how she wasn't ready to part with, his teddy bear, but she figured it was time to give up his baby sweater. You don't get to see those because they're not on display at the wall. And the Smithsonian has a couple items, but it doesn't have it. We travel with, several dozen of those items that help you understand the personality behind the men and women who are listed there. And that really brings it alive. And that's what's so great about bringing it into a community, is to then sit there and work with the kids who probably have parents who if they served in the military, might have a little bit about Vietnam, but they probably didn't learn very much about Vietnam. You're able to teach a third and fourth grader about Vietnam, and then the third and fourth grader bring their parents back because they're so excited. And at the end of the day, they're teaching their parents about the war and the wall. That's exactly what it was all about. And that's the experience we get to have each week.
That's just amazing. As you were talking about the ability to talk to people at their grade level, and I grew up in Virginia. I've been to like every battlefield that there is. You drive by them going from one place to another. And then I did a course where over the course of a year, we were doing all these leadership things. And they had an opportunity where you go to the battlefield and it was with a PhD researcher that walks you through it with a specific intent, like what were they communicating? How are they leading? It changed everything on like Civil War memorials or, the battlefields. It changed when like, oh, I look around, it's grassy field. Cool. All right, let's go. To like, oh, I get it. I understand why people are so into learning about these things. And I think that's what the wall does for these succeeding generations.
I think that's true. And we take great pride in the fact that when we're set up at a high school, you can bring out the statistics class, and we're going to talk about the statistics on the wall. We're going to talk about the fact that the average age is 23 years and 7 months. We're going to talk about the youngest and the oldest. We're going to talk about the bell curve that is the casualties of the war. You can bring out an art class, and we're going to talk about Maya Lin's vision about it being, that carve in the earth, that rawness of the wound opening up. So we're able to make that work and bring that to life. But I think the other piece that the wall is so magical for, and it transformed the way that we did memorials. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, 40 years ago when it was dedicated, there was nothing like it on the National Mall.
There was a lot of controversy. I was reading all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. There was nothing like it on the National Mall. We didn't have memorials to everyone who served. It just didn't happen. You flip that around, and now every single memorial, even the Korean War Memorial, they've gone back and added names because the names bring it to life. And I think what's special, and it ties into something that we have with the Mobile Education Center, is that on the Mobile Education Center, we have a 6-foot monitor. When we get into a community, and I was into Middletown, New York earlier this fall. Middletown, New York, we were able to sit there and show on this 6-foot monitor everybody from the county, Orange County, and then each of the counties that touch Orange County, New York. We were able to show the pictures, their names, what their hometown was, and bring them to life. Now, you and I aren't of the Vietnam era. We might know someone who's on the wall, but we don't necessarily know that. But the generations that come behind us, they don't have any clue. If we're able to bring those pictures to life and we're able to tell their stories, then all of a sudden it becomes more than that, because through those stories, you can have an identification with any child or any adult of any age. You're able to sit there and tell the story about the prankster on the wall and how he went in and stole the Naval Academy's goat before the Air Force Naval Academy game. You're able to sit there and tell about the guy who put, rocks in his pocket so he can make the minimum weight to get into the Marine Corps. All those little special things then bring these stories alive. And through that, we're never going to forget the individuals who made that ultimate sacrifice in this war.
It's so interesting when I think about the Vietnam War and then obviously the War on Terror. There's so many levels of, missions undone, not a rounding success like World War II. It's that sort of enduring long-term conflicts. I think that a lot of the younger generations of veterans are probably have a lot more in common with the Vietnam veterans and should probably go check it out, because at some point the Afghanistan and Iraq veterans and Syria and Jordan and all the other places we've been sending people for 20 plus years. Guys, there's so much going on with the Vietnam veteran memorial type of efforts that I think are going to have a lot of parallels to in 10, 15, 20 years where we're at today with the Vietnam veterans and the Iraq and War on Terror veterans. So I think it's pretty cool. So you guys go all over the country. You have hundreds of, or at least over 100 applicants. What kind of schedule is it? You said it's a week at a time. Is it every week? How does that work?
Pretty much every week, Tyler. We start in March. We run through mid-November. Nobody really likes to have us in their backyard in the holiday season, and I don't blame them.
I could see it.
We have to do some off-season maintenance as it is. We just finished this last week in Cabot, Arkansas, and we'll be off the road until the middle part of March when we get back out on the road next year. We're in it almost every week. We take an occasional break just to kind of rehab things, but almost every week we're in it all the way through that time period. The standard week starts on Tuesday. So Tuesday afternoon, we enter into a community. The host puts together an escort route. It's up to an hour long, and they invite local motorcycle clubs and organizations to basically have that homecoming parade they didn't get. One of the things that the generations who came after Vietnam often got was a little bit more of a welcome home, being met at the airport when you got in, having that homecoming parade or that parade down Constitution Avenue after, the first Gulf War. Those things happened after Vietnam, and it happened largely because the Vietnam veterans. The Vietnam veterans didn't have that coming into their hometown. So we have that hometown parade, that escort coming in on Tuesday afternoon. And then Wednesday, with about 40 to 45 volunteers, we set the entire thing up. Now, this isn't paid people. Half of them probably haven't even seen the wall in real life. And we guide them through putting this entire exhibit together by hand. There's no machinery. We put together the framework, fasten that so it's as perfect as the wall is. We take a break real quick, and then we bring out one panel at a time. 2 to 3 people carry every single panel, 146 panels in total. And they place each of those panels delicately into the framework. And at the end of that time, you get the majesty of the wall. You get the fact that when you look at it, it looks like one giant piece of granite. You get that reflectivity, and you get all that things that we do in making sure that it's a replica. Wednesday night, we get together with over 100 volunteers, hopefully, that are going to be our volunteers throughout the week, because we only bring in 2 staff members to most sites. And those 2 staff members can do a lot, but they can't meet and greet, 8,000 visitors. So those volunteers are really our presence on the ground. They're answering the questions, they're meeting and greeting people, and they're making certain that this is better than the experience you're going to get when you come to Washington, D.C. Then it's pretty much open from about 2:30 on Wednesday afternoon all the way up until about 2 o'clock on Sunday. And it's open 24 hours, just like the wall in Washington, D.C. And there are some times we get hosts that are like, well, we don't want to be open. One of the things that we have is, in 2023, we're going to be set up in Flushing Meadows in New York City. And New York City doesn't, as much as we say that's a big city and they don't do things after dark, they don't like doing things after dark. And so it became a big thing for us to sit there and negotiate. How are we going to be open 24 hours a day and make it safe? Because we're not going to go there if we can't replicate the wall experience in Washington, D.C. And so that's a big thing that scares a lot of hosts away, as they can't figure out how to make that work. And so we'll have thousands of visitors that'll come to us each day while we're there. And then concluding on Sunday at about 2 o'clock, when we wrap things up, and we get another 40 volunteers to play the largest game of Tetris that gets played every week. all those pieces right back into that trailer. And then we're moving down the road, and we move up to 1,000 miles away to the next community, which it repeats again starting over on Tuesday. So it's a continuous process.
So anytime I've moved, I've moved a lot in the military, just like most people. Things get broken, no matter how careful. How do you guys deal with that?
With a lot of white hair and each other and whiskey to recover from it. No, it's fortunately, the things get broken are not things, or we're able to make up for it. We don't have the ability to, carry duplicates of everything. In the 6 years we've now been out with the new panels, I'm going to jinx myself now, but with the new panels, only one time in those 6 years did we have something where somebody accidentally dropped a panel and broke it. We've had, storms that have broken some panels and that sort of thing, but we've been very lucky, and our suppliers are quick in getting us things, but, we make up for it and realize that we're going to put it together as best we can. And most of the times when something gets broken, most people aren't any the wiser for it.
So it sounds like an amazing experience. Is there any particular circumstances, situations, things that happen while you're out with the wall in some community that sort of just stand out as, particularly touching or surprising to you?
We could spend, 6 weeks of shows going over this. The stories that I have, it's always interesting. My family and friends always, when we get back in the office, they're like, all right, tell us the wall story from this week, because there's always there's incredible touching stories. The stories that I have are stories that are incredible moments and are tearful moments and everything else. I mean, I had a gentleman who was at the wall in Los Angeles, and he came down to the wall with his dad, and he was an amateur videographer of some sort. And he brought down his camera and everything else and brought his dad to the wall. And his dad was sitting there, and they were pointing at the wall and would tell a story, and they were pointing at a wall. And I tried to give him as much distance as I could. And the young man sat down, he's probably slightly younger than me, sat down and was just sitting there on the bench, and he was just overwhelmed with emotion and everything else. And I sat down and I said, "Tough afternoon." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I've, in the last 30 years, my dad has not talked about this much about the guys on the wall and his Vietnam experiences as he had today. And it's just all coming. It's as if I just opened up a spigot and it's coming out." And he said, "I just can't believe that he's kept all of this secret for this long." And those are more often than I care to admit. It's baffling to me.
Bury it deep. A lot of people, that
Absolutely.
was the way it was dealt with.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to get
smarter now, but
yeah, if you're going to get spit on, if you're going to get called names, if you're going to have to hide it from your employer and your friends and everything else, because they're not going to understand it, then why not just bury it for 40 years and 50 years? And of course, we know the long-term effects of that. And we see that in these men and women who went through that, unfortunately. So you've got that. You've got friends who come down, and one of the things I always encourage our volunteers to say is when they're looking up a name and they're taking somebody out to the wall to find the name, I said, ask the simple question of, tell me your favorite story about, and insert the relationship, your brother or Henry or whatever else. And those are the greatest stories in the world when you sit there and you hear the stories of the people that are on the wall. I asked that question about 5-6 years ago, as a man came up and asked me for a name on the wall. And I said, "How did you know him?" And he said, "Well, he's my son." And I was taken back a little bit by it. He didn't necessarily come in with the attitude that most parents come in. And it seemed like he had his daughter with him. And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, again, maybe it was his first visit to the wall. I wasn't going to prejudge or anything else. And as we walked out closer to the wall, he said, "He was my son, and I just saw the sign that the wall was going to be here, and I realized I needed to come down and visit and pay respects." And I said, "Well, that's incredible." He said, "I don't think I'll ever get a chance to come to Washington, D.C. I said, "That's wonderful." And I had my iPad, and I offered to show him the picture off of our wall of faces, because we have all but 2 of the 58,281 names. We have all.
That's amazing.
All of them. Yeah. And I offered to show him the pictures, and he was taken back. He said, "You have a picture?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I said, "Sure." And he goes, I'd love to see him." And we had got to the wall at that point. I showed him the name, and I pulled the pictures up, and I showed the pictures, and he and I were kneeling down by his son's name, and his daughter was looking over his shoulder, and he just, started sobbing. And he goes, "Oh my goodness, I just can't believe it." And his daughter said, "Well, Daddy, he looks just like you." And I thought that was a real weird statement to say. And I said, I was kind of taken back, figuring that it would eventually get there. And after he caught up with his emotions, he sat there and he said, "I had never known that I had a son, but about 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a lady that I kind of dated a little bit. And she told me that I had fathered her son, and I was anxious to meet him." And she said, "Well, your son died in Vietnam." And he said, "A couple weeks later, I see this sign for the wall, and I decided that I'd come see his name, and I could come down and see it, because I never figured I'd get to Washington, D.C. And now not only do I get to see his name, but I get to see his pictures that I've never seen, because she didn't have any pictures because she lost them all in a house fire. So I figured I'd never get to see him." And I just sat there and was floored by the fact that's the reason why it's called the Wall That Heals. That's the reason why we're able to get out coast to coast, is that there are these men and women who are drawn to it for one reason or another, and they need that healing that we need to have. And through the wall and through the wall of faces and our getting out there, we can help bring that to their own communities.
Tim, that's such a poignant, amazing story. Like, that's the whole point of it, is, closing those gaps. You couldn't have come up with a more esoteric reason for visiting the wall than that. And it's just so powerful. I could feel myself, like my chest, like, what a heartwarming but tragic story all in one. Tim, you said something I didn't know, and I think this is pretty shocking to me. 58,000 plus people. You have all but 2 photographs of those men and women.
Absolutely. So back in 2001, we realized that almost half of the people who were going to the wall didn't have a tie to somebody on the wall. They weren't alive when the war was happening. And now it's over half weren't alive when the wall was built in 82. So they don't have comprehension of those names. And you see them all the time down at the wall in Washington, D.C. They come down, they walk through it. They might see their own name or they might see somebody from their town, but they don't get it. We realized, well, let's go find these photographs and let's bring these people to life. And through the efforts of thousands of volunteers and now 21 years, just this last August, we declared that we had passed the milestone, that we had a photograph of all of the 58,281 names. Since that announcement, obviously, we got a lot of people who looked at the website and they found 1 or 2 that are in error. But, we're going to do our best to find those. But it's an incredible thing to be able to sit there and to show pictures of every single person. And through those pictures, you're able to see, those awkward moments. You can remember when we went through boot camp and they stopped yelling at us for 30 seconds to take that in-doc photo. You can remember, mom making you get that haircut before your junior class photo or putting on that, tux for your senior photo. All those milestones that these men and women on the wall had as well. And when you can bring those milestones out through photographs, suddenly these people come alive. And we realize that it's not just, a person who raised their hand and said, I will defend the Constitution and give my life for you. But in doing so, they gave up the life and the milestones that we have had since then and that we continue to have today.
I always think it's so interesting with Vietnam. It was the last time we really had an active draft. So there was a lot of these folks that were in no way intending to go join the service. We have an all-volunteer force for many years now. It's sort of just, we assume it's that way. But back then it wasn't. And these folks were told, hey, we need you, and you got to go to Vietnam. And that's such a big difference, especially with younger folks. I'm not a spring chicken, but it's been that way most of my adult life. There is no real draft. And it's amazing to think of the heroism and the sacrifice by people that wasn't their choice, but they went and did it anyway. And that's always a huge jump for me.
I think one of the telling parts of the exhibit that we have to that end is that we have the 1969 draft lotto numbers. So you're able to look at the chart and you're able to sit there and say, okay, my birth date is August 29th. And in that year, my draft number would have been 123. And so you're then able to sit there and say, okay, they just did the draft lotto. Your draft number is 123. Do you want to go and volunteer to join another branch of service? Do you want to go into the Air Force or the Navy or Coast Guard or anything else? Or do you want to hope that you're not going to get drafted? And you get the kids to raise their hands and say, well, I'm going to wait it out. And you're like, okay, well, we're going to grab 0 through 60. So all those of you who are under 60, you're now been drafted. And then all of a sudden you see those kids who are at 123 and say, okay, are you ready to go join one of those other, branches of service? Or do you want to, hold out hope? And you're able to play that game with high school kids who suddenly then realize, on the verge of being 18 themselves, they suddenly realize the very difficult decisions that the men had in the 60s as we went through this war and had that draft lottery.
So I just want to touch on just a little bit. We've talked about the Wall That Heals a lot because it's so important. But the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund does a lot of other stuff. Can you just real quick, maybe a few minutes, because it's so important and it's such great work.
Yep. Appreciate that, Tyler. So we're obviously the organization that was created in 1979 to build the memorial on the National Mall. We dedicated that in 1982. And then we went and added the 3 servicemen and the flagpole. The Women's Memorial was dedicated in 1993. And then in 2012, we dedicated the In Memory plaque. And the In Memory plaque is probably our biggest program that I'll get into. We still exist today, obviously, to do the Wall That Heals, to do the Wall of Faces. There's a reason why when you go down to the wall in Washington, D.C., and you look at the mall, that the wall is as perfect as it is. Because of the donations, we're still a nonprofit. We're not a government agency. We still have very generous donors, and they give us the money to make certain that grass is greener. It's thicker and it's lusher. The wall gets washed once or twice a week from May through November. The statue gets polished a couple times a year to make sure. We just replaced the entire stonework and the walkway in front of the wall and brought it up to code and made certain that it's not a trip hazard and that it drains better. We still exist today to take care of the wall. But our biggest program that we have, Tyler, the biggest thing that we have so many people that don't know about it, and that's the In Memory program. And it's the people who went to Vietnam. You know, the wall is dedicated to the 3 million who served in country, the 8 million who served in uniform during the Vietnam period. Of course, it lists the 58,281. But how many of our listeners and those in the American public look to the Vietnam generation and know someone who came back from Vietnam and they were forever changed? They were changed emotionally, psychologically, and unfortunately, physically in many ways, oftentimes due to their exposure to Agent Orange, sometimes due to PTSD and other traumas that they have. And their lives, we know scientifically that their lives have been shortened because of their service in Vietnam. Whether it's shortened due to their own hand and taking their own life or self-medicating and unfortunately dying because of the circumstances there, or due to the significant diseases related to Agent Orange exposure and the herbicides that we sprayed. Every single one of those people who lost a loved one from Vietnam sit there and say, my grandfather started dying the day he came back in 1969. He deserves to have his name on the wall. And for that reason, we created the In Memory program. And the In Memory plaque is a plaque there at the base of the 3 servicemen. And it's in honor of the men and women who went to Vietnam and came home and later died of illnesses and injuries related to their service. There's 3 million, depending on what number you use, 2.8 to 3.1 million men and women who served in Vietnam. There's probably, VA estimates, 2 million of them left. There's 1 million men and women who deserve to be honored through that In Memory program, and yet we only have somewhere around 8,000 people who have been honored by their family and friends to be honored in that. The In Memory program allows us to do a couple of things. First off, like the men and women on the wall, we've created up a website for each of them. So you can go in there and you can see, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Johnston, in the United States Marine Corps, 6869. You're able to see pictures of him. You're able to sit there and leave remembrances and honor him. But the pictures that you see there on that website are pictures of not just a guy in basic training in the Quonset huts off of Paris Island. It's the pictures of coming back and holding his grandkids. It's the pictures of, the time that they had after they served. Sometimes those pictures include the pictures when they're in the hospital and they're recovering or, on their deathbed. Those men and women deserve to be honored. And so the In Memory program is our biggest program. On Father's Day weekend, the biggest ceremony that we have at the wall every year, we have 2,000 plus people come down to the wall, and they literally get up on stage right there in front of the wall. And it's family member after family member who stand up on stage and they read the name of their loved one, and they sit there and they go one after another and they talk about their loved one's name, their branch of service, and what year they did. And that's repeated for 500 times. It helps them have closure. It helps them realize that here at the place that our nation celebrates service and sacrifice, we mourn your loss together. And it brings them together in a healing way so that they can realize that they want to honor and remember their loved ones, no matter how long they had to suffer with those diseases and those challenges. So it's such a great program. And if your listeners take anything out of this, going and finding those people who came back from Vietnam, who are sick now or who have been sick and died, get them signed up to be honored through the In Memory program is the greatest thing we can do to make sure that their legacy is preserved.
Tim, what's the best way if somebody was interested in getting someone on in the In Memory program or to find the schedule for the Wall That Heals? How do they find out more information?
So our website covers it all. So VVMF.org. So Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, VVMF.org. There you can get to the In Memory. There you can get to our teaching resources. You can get to the Wall That Heals schedule and everything else. If you can't remember, VVMF, you can remember the wallthatheals.org, and you can also get just to that, and it'll link you into the rest of the website, and you can go in through the backside. All of it is available. We have an incredible web team that makes that updated, and I'd encourage anybody to not only go and look at that wall of faces, the photos of those on the wall, but look at that in-memory program. And I hope they'll come out and join us in 2023 as we go to the 30-some sites that we're going to go to from coast to coast, and come visit us.
If you guys are listening to this on the car, don't worry about trying to remember it. We're going to have it up on the Facebook site and the website and all the other places. The social media team puts those out. So just go to Coming Home Well. If you can't remember, you'll find it as soon as you're listening to the show. It's in the show notes. That makes it a lot easier. But the Wall That Heals, that you just Google that, you'll be able to find it really easy as well. They have a wonderful program. They have a wonderful website. Tim, we've talked about a bunch of stuff, but what should I have asked you but didn't?
I think that you covered and had some great questions, Tyler. I think that when we look at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, we have to realize, whether you served before Vietnam or after, that the Vietnam generation gave our nation a tremendous gift through the memorial and through their actions after the war. Because of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, we realize that the National Mall is a place that we honor those who served and sacrificed. And because of it, we now have a memorial for World War II in Korea. Last year, they dedicated one for World War I. And I've been in on meetings and done the groundbreaking for the Gulf War Memorial and recent meetings for the OIF Memorial. So that has become normalcy. And then for everyone who served after Vietnam, the way that we were treated in uniform during any of those wars after Vietnam, the way that we were sent off, the way that we came back, and the fact that the GI Bill or the care that we get within the VA or the Vet Center program, that is because the Vietnam generation said no one shall be treated the way that we were treated. And so whether or not you served in uniform or whether or not you cherish those who serve in uniform, recognize those gifts were given to us by this great generation, and anything that we can do to honor and remember the men and women who served during that war is the best things we can do for our nation to pay it back.
That's a really good point. We've been able to now separate the warriors from the war. No matter what you think about the war on terror or any of the other conflicts, there's always something happening somewhere. We don't treat the soldiers and the sailors, the Marines and Coasties and everyone else. Well, we kind of still mess with Space Force, but they kind of deserve it. But other than that, we don't treat them badly because they went and served. And that's a huge paradigm shift. I mean, those Vietnam veterans had to, hide the fact that they served often wasn't even their choice. I mean, it was get drafted and go, and they had to it was a shameful thing. That, it really wasn't, but that's the way they felt because of the way they were treated. And now it's the complete opposite. So we do owe them a great deal of gratitude and thanks, because that's a huge paradigm shift in our country where we've separated those two things. Tim, thank you so much for coming on Coming Home Well. I really appreciate the time, and I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing. I love the concept of the wall, the ability to go to where it's needed as opposed to, hey, come to us, we're here. Going to and serving in the places where it's most needed is quite an amazing thing.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it. And I hope that everybody comes out and visits the Wall That Heals, or take some time to come in and see the wall and visit with us.
Thank you for joining us on Coming Home Well.
Thanks for joining us this week on Coming Home Well with Dr. Tyler Pieron. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. Follow us on Instagram at ComingHomeWell_BTS or on Twitter at ComingHomeWell. Thanks again. And until all are home and all are well, this is Coming Home Well.